Thank you, Scott. It's so good to be with you all today. The Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty is proud to partner with Texas Impact on a number of initiatives aimed at lifting up the voices of faith leaders and people of faith in opposition to the death penalty. The main message that I want to leave with you today is that the death penalty is on its way out, even in Texas. By the time you leave today or finish watching this webinar, I want you to firmly believe that the death penalty is going to end in your lifetime. The death penalty landscape in Texas has changed significantly over the last 15 years, mirroring national movement away from capital punishment. And by every measure, use of the death penalty in Texas is declining. Death sentences remained at a historic low level in 2016, and last year, executions also fell to their lowest number in 20 years. So to put that into some real numbers for y'all, back in 1999, Texas juries sentenced 48 people to death. Last year, that number was 3. In the entire state of Texas, 3 people were sentenced to death. It was the same number in 2015. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty far less often than they used to. Instead, they're opting for the alternative punishment of life in prison without the possibility of parole. That became a sentencing option in Texas in 2005, and it really has given prosecutors much more discretion in terms of how they handle capital cases. Many prosecutors also are deciding not to seek the death penalty out of concern for the exorbitant cost of death penalty trials and the burden that places on their counties. But prosecutors aren't the only ones opting for alternatives. We're also seeing Texas juries choosing alternatives as well. Over the last 2 years, juries who have been seated specifically to consider the death penalty have opted in nearly as many cases not to impose it in those capital murder cases. The death penalty has never been uniformly imposed in the state of Texas, even though our state kind of gets painted with a broad brush when it comes to capital punishment. In fact, more than half of our 254 counties have never sentenced anyone to death. And what we have found is that the death penalty is really geographically isolated in Texas and truly around the United States. Just 7 counties in Texas account for nearly 2/3 of the new death sentences imposed here over the last 5 years. But even in those outlier counties, the landscape is shifting. For the second year in a row, there were no new death sentences in Harris or Dallas counties. Together, those two counties account for those two counties have sentenced more than 400 people to death and account for 182 executions. Harris County, which of course includes Houston, has carried out or is accountable for more executions than any other state in the United States except for Texas as a whole. But even in Harris County, they haven't sentenced anyone to death since 2014. So things really are changing. Some things aren't changing though. Racial bias continues to impact the application of the death penalty in Texas. Over the last 5 years, 80% of these new death sentences have been imposed on people of color. All 3 men sentenced to death last year, African American, and death row continues to be disproportionately made up of African American and Latino defendants. I mentioned that last year the state of Texas carried out its fewest executions in 20 years. 7 people were put to death by the state of Texas. There were numerous other cases that were scheduled for execution, but were granted stays of execution by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is comprised of elected judges. And last year, the court granted stays to it granted 7 stays of execution. And this is really quite remarkable because the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals traditionally has allowed cases just to proceed without really batting an eye. But last year and the year before, we've started to see a shift, and the judges, raising concerns about things like faulty forensic science, untested DNA evidence, false witness testimony, and other issues. These are not new issues. These have been around for a long time, but thankfully we finally have a group of judges on that court who are putting on the brakes in some egregious cases. Still, Texas does remain the nation's most active state when it comes to executions. We have carried out 542 executions in the state of Texas. Oklahoma and Virginia come next on that list nationally. They've carried out around 116 executions, so it's a huge discrepancy. Still, I mentioned that there's this national movement away from the death penalty. So just 5 states carried out executions in 2016. And these 20 executions were the fewest nationwide since 1991. We draw a very clear distinction and make a dichotomy between death sentences and executions. We really see this decline in death sentences to be the greatest measure of the current political climate and public sentiment on the death penalty, because these are cases that are happening now, whereas executions involve cases that have been tried 10, 15, 20, 25, sometimes even 30 years ago, and those cases and the executions reflect the climate at that time. What we know is that there's every reason to believe that many of the individuals facing execution in Texas now probably wouldn't even have been sentenced to death had their cases been tried today, that the prosecutors would have opted for the alternative punishment. This doesn't mean that the problems have gone away, though. Even cases that have been tried in the last decade continue to raise troubling concerns about the administration of justice in our state. As I mentioned earlier, the death penalty really is geographically isolated. So what that means is that someone who commits a crime in a place like Harris County and someone who commits a crime in neighboring Montgomery or Austin County are going to be subjected to vastly different punishments. And we know that prosecutors continue to seek death for individuals with significant impairments, including evidence of intellectual disabilities, severe mental illness, and those who were barely legal adults at the time of the crime. We also know that while our legislature has made tremendous strides in addressing the causes of wrongful convictions in our state, mistakes continue to happen. Our most recent death row exoneree in Texas, Alfred Dwayne Brown, was tried and convicted in 2005. He was exonerated in 2015 after the Harris County District Attorney's Office dropped all the charges against him. There was egregious prosecutorial misconduct in his case, both in terms of the grand jury process, but also the fact that a phone record corroborating Alfred Brown's alibi was not turned over to the defense and was not found until 2013 in the garage of a homicide detective in the Harris County Police Department. We have had a total of 13 people exonerated from death row here in Texas. That's out of 157 nationwide. We also have several cases of individuals who have been executed who we strongly believe were wrongfully convicted. So what we are doing as an organization, the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty is a statewide grassroots advocacy organization, and we are working to reduce use of the death penalty, mobilize key constituencies, and inform the public about the realities of capital punishment. Our work in 2017 is focused on leveraging the state legislative session, building local leadership support, amplifying voices of experience. So these include individuals who have had direct interaction or contact with the criminal justice system as murder victim family members, as members of law enforcement, as families and friends of individuals on death row. We're also working to dismantle the death penalty county by county. And we're working particularly hard up in North Texas, where our North Texas outreach coordinator, Jason Reddick, is working to reduce use of the death penalty in Dallas and Tarrant counties. We are supporting bills that have been filed in both the House and the Senate that would abolish the death penalty in Texas. And these are Senate Bill 597 by State Senator Eddie Lucio Jr. and House Bill 1537 by Representative Jessica Farrar. We view these bills as important vehicles for engaging in dialogue with our elected officials about the changing death penalty landscape. As you may imagine, most state officials, most elected officials in Texas and state legislators aren't highly aware of the ways in which the landscape on the death penalty has changed in Texas. So we really view it as our job to educate them on the realities of this issue. So you can help us with these bills by urging your legislators to support them, attending committee hearings on the bills whenever they're scheduled, and registering your support. What we're calling for is hearings in the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee and the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. And on the House side, Representative Farrar's repeal bill has been heard by that committee in every session since 2009. So we have every reason to expect that will happen again this year. But like I said, we do think this is an important issue for legislators to discuss in an open and public forum, because executions are carried out in the name of the people of Texas. Some of our other initiatives include we continue to collect endorsements from Texas faith leaders on an interfaith statement of opposition to the death penalty. That's one of our partnerships with Texas Impact. We have more than 550 faith leaders statewide who have endorsed that statement. You can find the text of the statement in a form on our website, as well as the list of signatories to date as of 2 years ago when we first publicized the statement. We're also seeking your support on something even more immediate. Paul Story faces execution by the state of Texas on April 12th, which, as I think you all will know, is just 2 days before Good Friday, before Easter weekend. Mr. Story was convicted and sentenced to death for killing Jonas Cherry in Hurst, Texas in 2006. He was sentenced in 2008. So his is one of those cases that has moved through the system very quickly. There are some real issues in his case, but most extraordinary is that the parents of Jonas Cherry have called for clemency for Paul Story. They do not want Mr. Story to be executed for killing their son. They don't think that it will do anything to honor Jonas, and they don't want to see another grieving family in Texas. So we have issued an execution alert, an action alert, asking you to support the Cherries in their call for clemency and to contact the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles and Governor Greg Abbott to urge clemency for Paul Story. The board has to recommend clemency in order for the governor to grant it. However, he does not have to follow the recommendation. So we know that this is going to be a steep climb, but we think it's very important to get this story out there and to show that if the Cherries can show grace and mercy towards the man who took the life of their son, the state of Texas can too. I really appreciate the invitation to speak with you all today, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have on where things stand with the death penalty in Texas. Yes, sir.
I'm looking at these counties here. I think they're all east of 35. East 35. Is there any reason for that?
So the yes, exactly. So the question was about Texas's highest sentencing counties, and is there any coincidence that they all are east of I-35, except for Tarrant County, they're right on the line, right? Yes, I mean, these correspond for the most part with Texas's major metropolitan and urban areas. So at the top of the list, we have Harris County, Dallas, Tarrant, but then we also have McLennan, Brazos, and Kaufman County, which are not densely, at least Brazos and Kaufman, not densely populated. We have seen death sentences also out of the counties that have larger communities of color. So that also plays a role in the sentencing decisions. As I mentioned, though, just as an addition to that, I mean, our elected district attorneys, they have sole discretion in how they treat capital murder cases in their jurisdictions. So, I mean, these are, again, places where the district attorneys have been, emboldened to seek the death penalty. And it's really up to us as citizens to make sure that our elected officials at every level in government in Texas know that we're watching them, we're paying attention, and that, you know, the people of Texas don't want the death penalty. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that it's very expensive to prosecute a death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any figures on that? I know it depends a lot on how old the person is, probably, but I've been wondering about the figures. I'd always heard that
Mm-hmm.
it's less expensive to give somebody a life sentence. So do you have any figures on that?
Yes, we had a study it's several decades old now, but the ratio still stands. Every study that has been done on the cost of the death penalty versus life without parole shows that the death penalty is 2 to 3 times more expensive than cases involving a sentence of life without parole, and that's taking into account, you know, someone living in prison for, you know, 40 or more years. And there are several, so in Texas, the Dallas Morning News did a study back in the 90s that showed a death penalty case average cost $2.3 million. It was around $750,000 for a case involving a life sentence where the individual lived for 40 years. And, you know, it is counterintuitive for many people to think that the death penalty is more expensive, but there are several reasons for that. You know, the meter starts running from that very initial decision of a district attorney to seek death. These cases take much longer to prepare. You know, it's often the case, it's, you know, at least 2 years between the time when a crime occurred and when the trial may take place. And, you know, we're seeing that length of time getting longer and longer. So lots of preparation, lots of just human and financial resources that go into a death penalty trial. A jury selection process alone can take 6 to 8 weeks because every individual juror who is going to sit in a case where they're seeking death has to be questioned individually about their views on the death penalty. And if you as a juror cannot say that you would be able to consider the full range of punishment, then you would be legally allowed to be struck from that jury. So jury selection takes a very long time. The trials themselves often take a very long time because you have 2 distinct phases, a guilt-innocence phase, and then upon conviction, a sentencing phase where the defense advocates for a sentence other than the death penalty by presenting mitigating evidence, and the prosecution argues aggravating factors. So all of that takes a long time. It requires, you know, expert witness testimony, which is also very expensive. In one of our cases last year out of Kaufman County, it cost about $500,000 just for the cost of expert witness testimony alone, because you have to pay, you know, by the hour and travel expenses, what have you. So all of this adds up to a very expensive process just from the get-go. And then you have the, you know, years of appeals, which are extremely necessary because of people like Anthony Graves, who was on death row for 12 and a half years, in prison a total of 18 years before he was fully exonerated and found innocent. You know, you have to have these appeals to make sure that the state is getting it right. And we know even with all of this, we have so many examples of the state not getting it right. And, you know, our feeling is that if you can't have a perfect system, which we can't because it's based on the fallible judgment of human beings, then we really can't be in the business of killing people.